some of the most important, I think, some of the most important battles around housing have been fought in Haringey over the past decade. The biggest of them all has been the battle over the Haringey Development Vehicle, which was a plan by the Labour-run council and the leadership from, I think now two leaders ago, a lady called Claire Kober. And the big idea was to take pretty much every scrap of public land, public building that Haringey Council had, bung it all into a bag, do a joint venture with a huge developer called Lend-Lease, and effectively to move this, to turn this into kind of a investment vehicle. Whole swathes of high streets, public buildings would be knocked down and redeveloped, and in particular housing. And this was all being pressed ahead with very little in the way of consultation, as even the council's own consultation reports would say that there'd been very little consultation on knocking down this housing estate. Most people in the housing estate didn't know what was about to hit them, but still the council leadership wanted to press on. In the end, the battle over the Haringey Development Vehicle culminated in Claire Kober being ousted. And I think the ripples from that particular fight are still being felt. The leader who replaced her was ousted, I think, just last week. But one of the things that really stood out to me when I was thinking about, when I was reporting on the Haringey Development Vehicle, was the way in which residents talked about Haringey was completely opposed to the way in which both developers and the council talked about it. So the council, both officers and councillors, went to a property fair in Cannes, and they took along a brochure, and I think it was called something like Tottenham and Wood Green, London's next big opportunity. And the idea was to try and turn this part of outer London into part of inner London, just like Hackney, just like Islington, just a little bit further out. And you leaf through the brochure that they were passing out to property developers and executives, financiers. And there were pictures of kind of geezers with cloth caps drinking out pint glasses. There was, I think, a double page spread, I think, of a skinny white model. In all the years I've been through Tottenham, I've never seen a skinny white model walking down Tottenham High Road. And essentially, I think maybe there was just one or two photo opportunities afforded to Black and minority ethnic people in the entire booklet. This is about this is a booklet about one of the most diverse postcodes in Britain. I think even it was actually named Britain's most diverse postcode at one point, N15. And what one of the residents said to me during this big battle over the Haringey Development Vehicle, the HDV as it was known for short, was they talk about us as though where we live is just a brownfield site to build upon. That's not by any means restricted to Haringey alone. You can go to Peckham, you can go to parts of Enfield, you can go to lots of parts of London. When they are up for redevelopment, will get talked about, so no one lives there. They're a tabula rasa for the property industry to come in, do their thing, change them up, put wildly expensive new housing on them, and bring new people in. And someone who writes about economics, there's a kind of journey in places like Haringey, Tottenham and Edmonton, which have got very similar histories. These are places of light industry historically. The 20th century in Britain was places like Edmonton, Tottenham. These places were absolutely central to the light industrial economy that Britain had between the wars and just after the wars. This is where Tottenham, Edmonton, where the furniture was made, where televisions were made, where gas cookers were made. And what's happening in these areas now is they're going for a very, very rapid process of going from making to retail parks, big boxes facing each other, IKEA, Tesco's, these sorts of shops. And now those bits of retail are being squeezed out and housing is coming in instead. So you're going from making to shopping to speculating. And it's a journey that you're seeing played out at very fast speed on the outskirts of London in particular. But it's a journey that the entire country has gone on. And again, the political repercussions of that are something that we are dealing with more and more, whether it's through the prism of Brexit or even through the elections that we saw a couple of weeks ago. So that's what I wanted to talk about.
So I wondered, Owen, if, is that a kind of contemporary example of what you're talking about in Red Metropolis, of kind of proper left-wing politicians getting in and now being able to wield some power? Or is it more complicated than that, and is actually Claire Coburn, leaving and someone else coming in, not that something we should celebrate after all? What's your take on the kind of the ousting?
Oh, man. Well, one thing not mentioned really is the subsequent fate of, or not mentioned just now rather, is the subsequent fate of the market at Ward's Corner and Seven Sisters, which, to cut a very long story short, and obviously lots of people in London north of the river who would be watching TWT thing will know all of this backwards. I think they squandered a lot of their political capital that they'd built up opposing the HDV on then going ahead with the previous administration's plans to demolish that market. So I suppose it's that sort of social democracy working as it usually does, which is you stop something absolutely terrible, and the HDV was absolutely terrible, was an absolutely monstrous idea, and then you do something a bit shit. And I don't think what was being proposed for the market is anything like on the same scale as the HDV. And so I saw some people sort of suggesting that they were comparable, and that's just not serious. Like, there's a difference between like closing a market and gentrifying the space on it, and gentrifying every working class space in the borough. Like, they're not the same. But there was a terrible failure of political imagination from a lot of the councillors in question. And, some of it proved that the left can do jobs for the boys just as well as anyone. That said, I do think it was an improvement, and they have been building council housing rather than demolishing council housing. So, there is some progress in there, but that progress is, is sort of hard won and difficult. But all that said, I do think it was really important it happened, and it did show that you can actually stop a bad thing from happening. And that's always the kind of first stage in politics, isn't it? That you can you sort of successfully resist a thing, and the much more difficult question is then proposing something better in its place. And so far, although there has been some moves, it's that's been the thing that's been much more difficult for left-wing people in London local government. Much more difficult, I would add, as well, than it is in places where the economies are somewhat different. In somewhere like Preston, where basically big capital had said, we don't care what happens to you, we're going to let you rot. It was quite easy for the left in Preston, in a sense, to kind of go, we've got this great idea for what we're going to do instead. And to be allowed to do it, and be allowed to do it fairly unencumbered. Whereas for somewhere, like a London borough, where the price of land, the price of quite a small part of land, can be the price of a small island somewhere else in the world, and where you can speculate on it in the property fairs of the globe, and you can kind of advertise it for sale and God knows where. The temptation of sort of speculation and playing the property market, or hoping you can get a bit of money out of the property market and spend it elsewhere, is so strong that it's actually made things much more difficult in London than elsewhere. I think one of the really, really big someone's trying to call me, excuse me. One of the really big, I'm just trying to switch this off. One of the really big things that's really not noticed with all of the kind of red wall chat is actually the most successful left-wing councils in Britain are outside of London. They are in Preston, in the post-industrial north. They are in Salford in the post-industrial north, and they're in North Ayrshire in post-industrial central belt Scotland. London doesn't really have much to put up against that, despite the fact that supposedly the Labour Party is London-centric or the left is London-centric, which I think is at best a half-truth, that actually the left has actually been quite bad at fighting for London and Londoners. And the London left has been quite bad at fighting for London and Londoners. And in many ways, this book is about something else. But one of the kind of things I wanted it to do was, intervene in that a little bit.
Imagine, demand and build a world transformed.